All right, welcome everybody. This is Emmanuel Sowicz, your tonebase host. And today we have a special one. We have our guest, Shibe, who has graciously honored us with his presence. So I'm very excited to introduce him to you. But before that, I would just like to do the usual kind of tour around our facilities, so to speak, online. We are Tonebase, an online community that offers tuition for classical guitar and piano. Today, of course, we're talking about classical guitar. If you're new to Tonebase, do make sure to check out our website, and there are lots of interesting resources. We hope you'll find them interesting. I'm just gonna give you a little glimpse of what you can find in the forum. You'll also get to see Sean's face, who's getting ready to join us in a moment. So on the right here on the screen, you'll see that there's our Tonebase Guitar Community Forum, and if you take note of this address, I will put it on screen right now. So Tonebase Forum, you'll be able to access what you're seeing on screen. And if you go down, there's a live calendar which our team has carefully prepared. It has all the upcoming events, and here you can see Sean's event today on screen, and there's a little blob with an explanation. If you had any questions, you said, oh, I really want Emmanuel to address this, and put a really hard question to Sean, you could have written it here and we'd address that. But also we have the chat on Vimeo on the Tonebase website where you can ask your questions. We will preferably be answering questions through the Tonebase platform. So if you're on Facebook or YouTube, do try to find your way over to the Tonebase platform. But if not, we might have some time to get over to your questions on YouTube and Facebook as well. So yes, this event is being streamed publicly, which is a rarity. It's not very often, but let's have a look. Let's keep moving. If you have any other feedback, any ideas for future guests, for topics or anything, do make sure to pop me an email. It's on screen now. And now, without further ado, I will just start introducing our guest today. So let's have a look. I will show you a small table of contents on screen, and it should be popping up in just a few seconds. Let's have a look. So we'll have a bit of an introduction. We'll talk about identity, a short biography, so to speak, of Sean's. We'll get into programming, which is the main topic for today. Then we can possibly touch upon other topics, and finally there will be a Q&A. So if you do have questions, make sure to use the red button, leave them, and we'll address them at the very end. So let me turn this off now. Let's see, table of contents off, and we start with the first section. Okay. So, well, Sean Shibe was the first guitarist to be selected for the BBC Radio 3 New Generation Artist Scheme and to receive the Royal Philharmonic Society Award for Young Artists. In 2019, he won a Gramophone Award in the newly created concept album category for his critically acclaimed recording softLOUD. So I can hardly think of anyone more appropriate to discuss programming with us today. There are many other accolades that we could mention of Sean's. He's played with just about every orchestra in the UK that you could think of, and done lots of other exciting things. Today, he's been particularly generous in joining us, getting up at 5:45, taking a train over from Edinburgh and spending about 6 hours in rehearsal before finally meeting us today. So I'm personally very grateful for his presence here, and I would just, maybe not say any more, let you in your own words tell us a little bit about your journey with the guitar. So hi Sean, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here, and thanks for that very kind introduction. It's as I said before in the pre-interview, it's definitely the highlight of my day, and yes, of course, the pleasure is mine.
Very glad to hear. Okay, so I want to start a little bit with identity, or basically just try to get into who you are as a guitarist in the off chance that someone watching has not come across your music before. I'd kind of like to have a glimpse, who is Sean Shibe, because perhaps I imagine that might be related somewhat to your choices for programming or your choices of how to place yourself as an artist in the world. So I can start maybe with very brief questions. So how did you gain an interest in the guitar? Was it family, friends?
It was just a coincidence. I mean, I grew up with my dad sort of playing like socialist, anti-Thatcherite, pro-coal mining union songs, and so music was a part of my life from an early age, but it wasn't something that I took on initially. It was probably just a confluence of various events. So firstly, there was a guitar in the stringed instrument shop on my mother's walk to work, and the school sent home a little leaflet saying, you know, if you do want your child to join the clubs, the viola club, the cello club, and the guitar club, then this is the time. So it was just very much as a result of that that I did. Scotland also has like a couple of national centres of excellence. I think was the umbrella term used for them at the time. I'm not sure what they're called now, but essentially they're state-funded music schools. So I was very lucky to be able to access a specialist education from quite a young age. And I know for a fact now that they're not as easy to access as they once were. There are definitely fees of some kind involved. Of course, it's not as huge a fee as you would find in your average private school, or even your below averagely priced private school. But it's obviously a barrier at whatever level. So that's sort of how I got into music.
It sounds fascinating to me how your very beginning with music was very much associated to something else, kind of a sense of, well, as you say, like the songs you sang or you played with your dad. How you started as well, I find it maybe valuable to rescue the idea that you're very much a beneficiary of maybe government policies of, you know, of promoting musical education, something which nowadays perhaps is worth, you know, keeping in mind as certain decisions are being made as well, in the UK at least.
For sure, yeah, and I think, you know, I think there were a lot of my colleagues as well who just would not have had the same access to that sort of high art that they did through the policies at the time. Yeah, I think we're very much at the mercy of whatever government's going through. That sort of mythology, you know, of also of the guitar, I think fits quite neatly into that. You know, the idea that it's the antithesis to the lute and the aristocratic and ecclesiastical connotations of that. You know, it's something much more folkloric and of the people.
Yeah. Wonderful. So, okay, with that, then obviously you progressed. At what point did you start studying, like, in a way you said, this is probably what I want to do, this is probably what I want to devote my life to?
Probably when I started studying with Alan Neve at the Aberdeen City Music School. That was about 14 years old. I started to board in Aberdeen, and a year and a half later, I went to conservatory. So I started my undergrad.
Fantastic. And as I understand it, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, like the first of many steps that launched your career today, was that the Royal Overseas League competition, would you say is kind of the first impulse you got, or was there something before that helped you leap forward?
I think that was probably the first point that I was like, oh, this is Manny, look, I should just say, a friend just texted me saying I'm echoing pretty badly. Are you getting that?
It is echoing a little bit. It's not super concerning to me if it's what I'm hearing. Let's see.
I'm not sure how I'd fix an echo. I might just close some programs on my computer and see if that makes any difference. I think, you know, you're pretty bang on the mark. I mean, I do think that as you're going through education and sort of, you know, the initial steps of building some sort of you know, relationship with what you do. I mean, I think that at that point it's like primordial. It's not really at the point that you're career building. I think there are so many little steps that I could think of that led to a sort of you know, slightly more coherent sense of identity and the way the way I thought about the guitar, and you know, without those little steps, things like Royal Overseas League would not have been as as important as it was to me. But definitely in terms of things that very tangibly led to being recognized in other ways, Overseas League was the major thing.
Okay, cool. Just a small note. I think I've solved the echoing issue, but if anyone has any notes, we'll find out soon. So
Sure.
yeah, do let us know if there are any issues for you viewers. So the Royal Overseas League, for those who don't know, the Royal Overseas League is one of the most important musical competitions for young musicians in the UK. It's open for, I believe, members of the British Commonwealth countries or citizens of the British Commonwealth countries. So it's a wide kind of amount of people who are able to apply. And Sean not only won the strings category because it has different categories, but he also then progressed into the final and won the gold medal, I think it's called. So that's quite a feat, I think, and that presumably brought you to the attention of people making decisions for the BBC Young Artist scheme and kind of wanting to invite you to play with orchestras and such things.
Yeah, so I think as a result of that, there was a man who invited me to his festival in Scotland, and he was one of the nominating people for something called the Borletti Bertoni Trust, and I received an award from them, and one of their evaluating panel was the man who decided at that point who gets put on the BBC New Generation Artist scheme. So it was definitely it was definitely like a very, you know, I think a lot of the time people were like, oh, exposure, this will give you exposure, and you're like, okay, sure, what you know, you do it because we're all pretty good natured about this thing if we have any intention of sticking around. But we know, you and I know how many times we've been told this is going to offer you exposure, and it's not really a thing, right? But this was definitely one of the points where I was suddenly aware of the power that it was just a very immediate cascade of things, you know. And it wasn't like I was suddenly wealthy. I was still living at home with my parents for about 3 or 4 years after that, um, but it's sort of those things are important in that they're gestures of support, and you're being told effectively, this is, people believe in you, you know. Stick to what you're doing. And I think that perhaps particularly with the guitar, where the support mechanisms around you are so intricate, obscure, and uh, more or less, like, in some ways quite weak in terms of their connections to the mainstream musical world. Um, I think that was very important for me to receive.
Fantastic. I'd like to kind of pick up on a small distinction because there are, of course, all of these competitions and things that we can enter for. You know, you can kind of, it's a public call and you can say, oh, I'll sign up for that, and you'll be up against whoever else has signed up for that. But the the scheme you mentioned, the first one, could you remind me how it's called?
Borletti Bertoni Trust. Yeah.
Yes, and also the BBC Young Artist scheme. As I understand it, you can't actually apply to those. Like, someone needs to be aware of you and needs to kind of put your name on the list, so to speak, think, actually, I think this is a remarkable young musician who deserves to be considered. And then, like, you'll be up against the other suggestions by other members of the panel, and they'll say, yes, you, I think this is the guy we should support. I don't know if I'm right in saying that both of these have that system.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's very anti-democratic, and in its own strange way, it does function. The BBC is still an anonymous list of deciders who change year on year. So the idea is nobody is building up their reputation as somebody who is regularly a contributor. They're trying to avoid.
I mean, it sounds like it's kept really
them.
fair, and I have no doubts about that. I think what I like to pick up on is the fact that just by doing this one thing, the Royal Overseas League, suddenly you got this, you know, certain exposure. And I wanted to ask you, how does it feel, or how did it feel to be, I don't know, called or sent an email or whatever saying, actually, we're considering you for this out of the blue, without you taking first the initiative to kind of jumpstart that?
Oh well, it's pretty nuts. I mean, when you get put on the BBT thing and you get it, Mitsuko Uchida phones you up and says, "Hello, like I'm Mitsuko Uchida," and like congratulate, and you're sort of like, it's very surreal, you know. And the BBC thing was similarly surreal. I mean, it's very sudden, you know. It's kind of classic BBC, decided quite relatively last minute, you know. And just as a side note, the BBC scheme has become more democratic, and it was a very un-BBC way to run it. Was one man deciding who gets put on it. And sort of, you know, just like every year suddenly prolapsed out will become these like a selection of 6 artists who would just be the chosen ones. Now it's become a sort of like they will approach artist agencies, and they will approach other people they see as like players in the industry to recommend people, and the people that they recommend will then audition for BBC people, um, which has worked in some ways, and has not worked in other ways. Um, in its own strange way, I mean, I think this kind of like anti-democratic way of running things has its own validity. You know, I think there's room for a bit of both, really. Um, but look, I mean, yeah, coming back to the root of your question, um, I do think like I was very grateful to receive those things. I was quite surprised. I think uh, I think I hadn't really considered that I would be able to have some sort of identity outside of the guitar sort of competition circuit at that point. And I think I definitely felt, you know, like you go around and you're in college and you're surrounded by the same 20 or so guitarists, and there's a group think that develops. And I think, you know, at my time there, people were like, "Oh, Britain Nocturnal, very strange piece. Why would you play that in a competition? Very risky, very eccentric," you know. And of course, it's not really that eccentric, right? It's pretty normal, right? It's like it's not like pushing the boundaries, um, or at least it shouldn't be. Um, so when you play the pieces like that and you find them accepted by a world and rejected by another, you sort of develop some sense of like where your aesthetic priorities align with other people, and to understand that it aligned with a group of people that, or it happened to at that point, you know. And like, you know, you're tossed between choice and chance at that point, but um, it was very liberating and encouraging, and I think that's definitely what I needed just at that point that I was about to exit college.
So, so that's I think a wonderful way to actually get into the topic for the evening today is repertoire. How exactly would you say being part of the BBC scheme changed or perhaps helped construct your ideas, your maybe principles about programming, as opposed to the principles or ideas you may have come with before from this rather maybe more niche world of classical guitar?
So the way the BBC scheme works is that you essentially have to record twice a year about 45 minutes of repertoire in the studio. And on top of that, you're recording a bunch of live concerts at various festivals, and you're doing chamber music partnerships, and you're playing concerti. So all in all, you're probably learning about like 2.5 hours of music every year, or at least you have to put down on record 2.5, 3.5 hours of music a year, which is quite a lot. And I think it's possible, but I think most of us were glad that it didn't last for longer than 2 years. And it forces you to sort of really think quite radically about the way you appropriate time. And I definitely felt like it was consuming my life. And I'm also glad that it didn't last longer than 2 years. I think what's great about it is that so few guitarists are taken on, that you have um, a huge amount of freedom in what you want to record. So in a sense, and this may not have been necessarily a healthy thing, but it encouraged um, those preferences that I had aesthetically in the first place, and sort of exaggerated them, because I knew that no matter what I did, it would sort of be accepted. And, you know, even maybe if it wasn't always put out on air, you were definitely still being paid for the time that you spent in the studio recording it. So yeah, it was great. I mean, to just feel like, okay, you can just go out there and record hill runes and nocturnal and obscure contemporary minimalism.
That,
So
yeah, it sounds fantastic
sorry.
because I'm just thinking like there's this maybe preconception when you're studying. You know, you think of artists that are out there who had record labels and whatnot, and there's this assumption that they have heavy pressure from the industry, in whatever form that may be, their agent or their producer or whatever, to choose certain repertoire, and you need to do this, you need to do that. But it sounds very much the opposite in your case, at least with the BBC scheme, that you felt you could feel free to explore whatever musical inclination you might have had, however obscure that would have been. Do you think that's something that you still feel today? You still feel the same freedom to choose the repertoire that you wish to play, or are there ever any different considerations that you started thinking about? Maybe thinking more about the audience, how would they receive it, or what might appeal to them a little bit more? How does this balance between your very own personal inclinations or external factors work?
So I think that the way I was learning in the BBC New Generation Art Scheme was definitely still like a kind of conservatoire mindset of really wanting to make sure I'd learned this thing for like, ideally traced some sort of identity with it 2 years in advance and sort of have 8 weeks with it before putting it down on some sort of semi-permanent record. And not just last minute fisting this into the constraints of the studio section. And that meant that I spent a lot of time focusing on it in a way that now, when one is slightly busier and gives in to the onslaught of work coming your way, which is not, you don't have to be very popular to be over burdened by the commitments that you sort of say, oh, I'll do it, right? I mean, we've all experienced that now. But I think any difference in the amount of freedom that I feel is mostly due to that being more open to the workload and sort of trying to understand your boundaries in that sense. I think when I was in my early 20s, it was very much trying to understand what I could get away with, what I could get away with in terms of preparation time, but getting it to absolutely the highest standard that I could, and never taking more, and being very risk averse, right? And now I'm sort of pushing the boat out in the other way, and it's produced some pretty hair raising moments, but I think you need to sort of understand a bit of both before you can find the middle ground.
This is great because it's, for me at least, it's completely counterintuitive. It's like, for me, what most people, it's perhaps a unfounded opinion, but what most people might tend to do is when there's little at stake, such as when one is young, a music student, one might feel it's easier to risk things, and when one has something to risk, a career or a reputation, you might feel you want to hold on to it somehow. But like you're telling me the exact opposite, it's like the more opportunities you get, like the more you feel like continuing, exploring, pushing boundaries, and maybe perhaps risking making someone walk out of the hall. Who knows? Like,
yeah, I think when I was, like, what I'm really grateful for at this stage is that when I was in conservatory, I do feel, and the reality, this is the way I feel looking back on it. The reality of the time may have been, look, we've all looked back on recordings that we've thought, that was a great recording I made, that was a great concert. You listen to the recording later and you're just like, oh my God, that was pretty shocking, I think we've all had those moments. But when I look at my experience of conservatory art, I do feel like I tried my hardest to get as deep as possible into the music, and I understand, like, I feel like I understand how deeply one can feel what one is doing, no matter what the end product is actually like, with years of context. that's the value that I think conservatory has. It's not learning loads of music that can come at any point. It's sort of the space that you're given, or at least that was the sense that I had in the Conservatory of Scotland. There were extracurriculars that one could easily opt out of. It was not your classical university experience. It was something much more, slightly inappropriately free, and it gave me this room to feel like, yeah, I could um, spend a lot of time with his music and feel like, to the point of like anal retentiveness, uh, understand what I was aiming for in the future.
So, to maybe think about our viewers a little bit, there are a lot of people who are music students, a few professionals, lots of very serious amateurs. And I want to ask you, maybe on their behalf, what do you look for in assembling a program? Are there any kind of overarching, principles that you could say, yes, this is how I construct it, and it makes sense whether I end up choosing like really unorthodox repertoire or really classical things? Is there some kind of very deep, underlying thought that you have when you assemble a program? What do you want to achieve?
I mean, I think practically it is. There are usually like two or three works that I decide, however long in advance, I want to learn these things. Um, and from those works, which probably have a degree of calculation in how they might interact, or ideally there are like three or four ways in which they might connect, whether that's through tonality or texture, um, or more explicit thematic ideas like, how they're titles and that sort of thing. Um, Ideally, I'll have those two or three pieces there, and there are different ways in which they can be contorted through the relevance that the other pieces have around them. And then probably about 4 months before that, I'll be thinking of other things that could fit into that and how it will weave together. I want to have as many options as possible, and to refine that as late as possible in the day. On a broader sense, like less kind of logistically speaking, I think. I think one really has to examine the way one thinks of the guitar and what one wants to do with it, right? And I think, a lot of people have sort of made that decision quite early on. Like Milos, for instance, is like quite open, I think, about the way he thinks the guitar should be perceived, and he's really not wrong when he's like, this instrument is ubiquitous; it exists in everybody's living room, and that is a power to be harnessed for sure. I think for me, um, its ubiquity is helpful, but it's not imperative. What is imperative is it's potent. The instrument, the guitar's Bartesian kind of mythology, in that, as I was saying at the beginning, it's not an instrument of the elite, right? It's sort of defined against the elite. The lute was the instrument of the aristocratic and ecclesiastical circles, but the guitar was always pregnant with darker and sometimes pagan associations, like the Moors of brought to Spain and the peasantry that adopted it. So it's sort of got this wild and untamed element to me. And I think like playing the lute a little bit over the last couple of years and playing the electric guitar gives me experience when I was younger with my like father playing these songs and this sort of thing. And I think this idea lives on in the way people see the instrument now, right? Like Woody Guthrie's "This Machine Kills Fascists," right? It's still an instrument of protest. It's still defined against the establishment. It's no surprise, perhaps, that um, you know rock, the genre originally of the anti-establishment, adopted the guitar for its frontman, albeit in a form of the instrument that is um, electrified and distorted and made altogether louder. So, am I cutting out or not?
Sorry, Sean. If I am not speaking right now, it's just there's a little bit of a technical issue I'm trying to solve
That's okay. Yeah. Shall I just
with the audio.
shall I pause while you're doing that?
Apologies for that. Okay, let's just make sure this is.
Manny, can I get to the toilet?
Okay, sorry, this is better. Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah, it's just something funky with the audio, but again, viewers, if you could reassure me everything's okay, I'll appreciate it. So sorry, you were talking about like what you want to do with the guitar, basically, kind of take into consideration like what the guitar's identity is and how to play with that. I was wondering if you could maybe walk us through what your thinking was at different stages during your career. So you have, correct me if I'm wrong, 4 album releases by now, or is it 5?
I think it's 4, yeah, probably 4 solo albums.
Yeah. So what was the first album? Was that Dreams and Fancies, or?
Yeah, well remembered. It was a bit of Dowland and Nocturnal, and a lot of the the fruits of Julian Bream's commissioning output with specific relevance to 20th century England. Look, I think all of that was music I'd spent a very long time with, and I played a lot, and I felt very comfortable with, and I was ready to record it, and I'm happy that that's what I chose. It had a theme, but I think it's just in the UK we play a lot of the English guitar repertoire because it's England. So that's it was not particularly calculated. It was kind of a natural conclusion. Whereas I think the second album was probably like a lot more calculated, and it was like sort of framing, using back to seismic political events, and I mean, I sort of feel again that that's indicative. That's sort of a result of like the idea of the guitar as an instrument of protest of the anti-establishment, and the idea that musically speaking, what we do is we re-examine. Okay, it's not a great word. It's got its problems, but for a shorthand, we'll use the word canonical works that are shrouded, and we see through that shroud, and we sort of demystify them by placing them in a context that means they can be critically examined. And I think a lot of the time, that means that we're placing canonical works within a contemporary context of contemporary classical music, and that's how we see through their status as works of classical status. But I think that also goes for like a way in which we can examine the way we're programming and the way we interpret music. That we need to somehow find a way of making it relevant. And I guess, and this is particularly relevant perhaps to quite insular classical guitar circles, that the question of whether or not classical music will like survive in the way that a lot of people in my community want it to is dependent on the degree to which we place it within contemporary society. Like the degree to which we make it very explicitly clear how relevant it can be and how far it can sum up a zeitgeist.
So I'm thinking about your...
And for my $2, I don't think Rosinian has quite cut the mustard there.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Yeah, the first polemic statement of the evening. Rossinianas, yeah. I think more than one would agree with you there. I just want to pick up on something you said about, finding where classical guitar maybe sits in the wider spectrum of, I don't know, society or the industry, the music scene. And your second album, softLOUD, is really interesting to me because it's quite disruptive in the way you've chosen the pieces. You have obviously the softness represented by playing the classical guitar, very mellow, kind of subdued arrangements of Scottish lute pieces, if I remember correctly, contrasted with just about the loudest thing you could imagine on electric guitar. And it seems to me that by kind of doing that sort of thing, or in general, like a principle of life, if you have, something with certain qualities and you contrast it with something of the exact opposite qualities, you're basically bringing out the inherent, qualities of each. It's like if you have black and white, it's much easier to see which is which than if you have shades of gray. And sometimes it seems like, classical guitar is a little bit like that. Like you have sometimes just, I'm exaggerating or simplifying, but like shades of gray. And suddenly in this album, it's like you have this black and white, and quite literally in the cover. And it kind of brings out or exposes exactly what the nature of the instrument is almost when you put it in such an unusual context. I don't know if that was something that was perhaps part of your thinking, or there was something completely different behind it, or how you think that same thinking might apply to, even not taking up an electric guitar. How do you maybe apply that same principle within a purely classical guitar recital?
I think it was Bream was talking about the electric guitar, and he said, it's like just such a seductive instrument because it's so loud, and like for people who play an instrument that is so inherently quiet, that is just such an attractive quality. And I think what you were saying at the beginning. Okay, I mean, sure, it's not like I wasn't like, oh, this is going to be a great idea because this is bringing out the best in that thing, and this loud thing is bringing out the best in that soft thing. Um, but I think when you hear works that will fit onto an instrument that you play, it's a very visceral reaction that one has to those things. You know how feasible they could be, and part of the attraction to making those feasible things part of your um, output is that you've had that gut level reaction to um, how loud those bass notes can be. So how does that apply to classical guitar? Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't think I don't think I've come up with a program that I think has been something that I'm as proud of as that since. I think that like I'm not sure if there are principles there that one can extrapolate. I think that there are maybe like principles that I had or have that led to that project that have led to other things, but they've all been quite different. Um, and I think like one can't pursue um, extremes for their own sake, right? Because it's sort of just a bit showboaty, and I think people realize it for what it is. Um, I think one has to really look. I think the thing is like I've slowly discovered a way of seeing the instrument that I'm happy with, and a way of approaching the way I learn music on it, which I'm vaguely happy with, and playing in a way that I'm from time to time happy with. And maybe it's more distinct than other people, and maybe it's not. But um, it took a long time to get there. And I think when people have these questions of like, oh, how do I form my artistic identity? They often ask other people, like, what should I be doing and what are your principles here? But like, well, maybe they should just first spend a long time trying to work out how they see the instrument, and like, really think about what rep they think is relevant to the contemporary world, rather than just trying to refine something like, their dotted rhythm MA 3-octave arpeggios. Do you know what I mean? It's like just it sort of all comes from praxis.
Okay, so I guess one question I have for you is: do you see the classical, like the electric guitar, as an extension, of your work on the classical guitar, or is it like a second instrument for you, something separate and distinct?
I don't think I'd see the electric guitar as like an extension of classical, just because it's so alien, and like classical guitar is an instrument defined by its limitations, and the electric guitar is the opposite. Um, I think you have to take these instruments on their own terms, and perhaps in my initial forays into playing the electric guitar, I was probably a little bit naive, um, and I think it's the more I learn about it, the more I'm sort of in awe of it. I would say that I feel like the lute, in comparison to the guitar, musically speaking, the guitar can do like 90% of what the lute does, or do what the lute does to like 90% capacity. Um, but you're dealing with a radically different technique. And the electric guitar, the technical overlap is pretty huge, but musically speaking, you're doing something completely different. It functions in a totally different way. So the electric guitar is sort of a better bang for your buck, right, in terms of the hour investment. And the lute, despite us all like trying to play a bit of lute, is like a terrible investment in some ways, And of course, there's also that trope of like all those guitarists who spend any more time with the lute just become lutenists because the music's so great. Um, so yeah, look, I also, what I'd say is that the electric guitar is something really attractive to contemporary composers. I think there are a lot of composers who maybe you want to work with, and they don't really want to write for the classical guitar, but then you find out that they really want to write for the electric guitar, and that's kind of, why is that? I mean, I think the chaos and the sort of postmodernism of the electric guitar as an instrument is very attractive to composers of our generation, and I am, of course, reactionary in my own sort of small c way, but I I think one should embrace that as well.
So it seems to me it's maybe a nice moment to start talking about new music and what your relationship to new music is. Um, it seems to me that it's something you already started exploring during your studies, and perhaps you did that increase or decrease in volume as your career went further? How's your relationship with living composers?
I think it's always it's been a consistent thing, but I I think there's an element of duty there, and I think also that I think the two, the aspects of like doing something strictly established, canonical, and contemporary, whether or not the composer is alive or you've worked with them necessarily. I really, everybody says it, but of course they feed off each other, and not only in the musical sense or the sense of one understanding how to interpret it, it's also in the sense that approaching the canon with seriousness means that when you approach contemporary music, people take it seriously, and approaching contemporary music seriously means that you have things to offer that are often quite radical and unusual to the canon, and you see it with a sense more of adventure than you would otherwise. I think it's easy to, you know, recast that shroud of privilege over canonical works, and I think the idea of the contemporary acting as something that penetrates that is has always been pertinent. So, so I've forgotten your questions.
No, that's okay. But I'll pick up on a few. I'll pick up on a few things you mentioned. You kind of sense of duty in a way, and the fact that if you play the canonical repertoire with commitment, that's something that, or if you take it seriously, then when people hear you play modern music, they'll take it seriously as well. It's almost like uh, you're you're using whatever good fortune you might have in your career as a performer to also try to lift modern music into the spotlight as well. And I spoke to a friend about new music recently, a composer who lives in Germany, and he told me something which made me think. In a way, playing contemporary music is the oldest practice ever. That like playing old music is only a 20th century development. But before that, you would never really have played music that wasn't from your time. So I found that really interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the Academy of Ancient Music was set up to play music that was, what, in the last 50 years. That's its genesis. That's nuts, right? That's not the way we see it now. Yeah, look, I mean, I think there's that thing from the audience perspective of, okay, this person's obviously able to approach the canon with seriousness. So even though I don't understand this contemporary thing, it must be worth my time if this person is spending their time on it. And yeah, I mean, the Nazis are back, and the world's on fire, and the sea's on fire, even, and somehow like the contemporary seems the best way to reflect that. I don't know how secure I feel in playing things like the aforementioned Giuliani Rosinianas or whatever guitar competition war horses, and feel like I'm doing anything but dust the tomes of aged library volumes, as some sort of like demented caretaker. Um, I, I, it, I think classical music is sort of in crisis, and that's okay. I mean, what isn't? But I'm not sure that the the best reaction to that is sort of going back to what sold records in the 80s.
Well, then you have like the famous case, is it the Julian Bream album, the 20th Century Music, which like producers thought was going to be a flop, and much to their surprise, it was actually it's a huge, massive success. You'll probably know more about the story than I would. That's about the extent of it for me.
I don't know more about the story than you do.
Okay, but that's, I'm not misguided, right? Like he actually went out on a limb and succeeded with modern music, like playing what?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking. So you talk about maybe music, modern music, responding to like the very real problems of the modern age. Like the earth is on fire, kind of. Metaphorically speaking, but not so metaphorically, I guess.
Well, I mean, it's not metaphorically. Yeah, I mean, it's literally like, look, it's not like I think it's going to solve anything, but I think there's just a level of dishonesty if I'm playing something so sweet and nourishing, and actually just what I want to do is be like, screaming into the void. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I feel like we all have that sense of existential crisis, and I think that, like, when it comes to so many parts of any sort of artistry, we have such a great gift in that sometimes we're even being paid to express ourselves, and so why are we not expressing all those things in our heads? We're not like, for the last 150 years we've not been seen solely as like servants of monarchy, right? We're actually also sort of heroes in our own right. We're able to have autonomy in a way that historically we didn't have, and I find that in its own strange nihilistic sense quite liberating.
I'm reminded of a video I saw recently. It's You've probably seen Kazuhito Yamashita's arrangement of Mussorgsky's pictures at an exhibition, which is kind of a revolutionary arrangement in its own right. And one of the comments I remember said that he originally intended to study economics out of some kind of intention to like better the world, and eventually realized that by doing that, it was very unlikely that he would actually be able to make a huge influence. And the comment suggested, at least, whether it's true or not, but I like to think it is, that he ended up studying music because through music he felt he could actually, in a way, improve people's lives in a kind of in a very real way, like emotionally or spiritually, I guess. What their, how they feel their existence on this earth. And I think I could really see that point of view and kind of understand it and say, well, actually, yeah, you might say music is mere entertainment, but you could also say it's kind of communicating experiences which are at the very core of what it is to be human. And if that's not important, then I'm not sure what is, honestly. So.
Right, and I think like some in the past couple of years, and like you mentioned people walking out of concerts, and I think I don't really approach it with the idea that okay, what I want to do is provide this nourishment. I mean, sure, okay, look, it's not like I'm turning up with the intention of like pissing people off, but I was doing an interview the other day, and the presenter was like, "Oh, you had some XYZ number of walkouts at this concert. You clearly enjoy antagonizing people." And I was like, "That's not true." But I think that it's important that there's diversity in the classical guitar world, and that there's diversity in the musical world in terms of the way we think about it, as well as in terms of many other parts of what diversity is. But I think there's room for people who want to comfort, and I think there's also room for people who find what's going on day to day in the world as a result of like the neoliberal kind of hegemony, like this day on day like violence, very disturbing. And it's not like by playing works that are confrontational and agonizing and sometimes literally painful to listen to, I think I'm changing the world for the better. But you're sort of just holding up a view of the way you've reacted to things that you've experienced to an audience that potentially is one of the most conservative and privileged audiences out of any art form on the planet. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I kind of take a little bit of glee in, I mean, it's another Guthrieism, right? You're like, songwriters should be comforting the disturbed and disturbing the comfortable. And it's just sort of that, what is it? The Rage of Caliban, right? Seeing his reflection in the mirror, in the pond, in the pool, whatever it is. I can't remember. It's been a while since I read Dorian Gray.
It's been a while for me too, so I'm afraid I can't help much. But I'm thinking this. Yeah, I mean, I guess music, you could hardly say it serves a single function. So yeah, to say that perhaps it's meant to comfort people or it's meant to only disturb or disrupt would be kind of unnecessary pigeonholing, and especially nowadays, like where the same activities can have so many different meanings and functions. I kind of gravitate towards the idea that music as an art form in a way holds human experiences of different sorts, and that by presenting these to different audiences, in a way you're kind of making them empathize with experiences they may not have had themselves. So if you think of it like, I don't know, storytelling and morality, let's say. So by giving a certain account of, let's say, the Holocaust, you could, that's a bad example because that's historical, it actually happened. But let's imagine there's like a fictitious, event like the Holocaust, and it's completely imaginary, but the storytelling is so well written that someone reading it might kind of construct certain principles, certain values, very strong values of, how humanity should behave, what kind of values should be upheld. And uniquely, like, or only through storytelling. So my extrapolation is like perhaps through music you can in a way kind of convey experiences, whether they're emotional or whatever music means to you. You can convey experiences to people who may not have had these experiences themselves, whether those are of comfort or disruption or whatever. It kind of opens up their experience or their what it is to be human for them. I don't know if that's something that you would kind of share or have a different opinion upon, perhaps.
Yeah, look, I mean, now you put it that way. Maybe I was actually not being entirely honest, and I actually do just enjoy pissing off rich people. Maybe, yeah.
I think that's a noble activity in
Is
its own way.
that a noble cause? I think that's a noble cause.
Let's go with yes. Yeah, definitely. Okay. I would like to talk a little bit about your most recent release. So we said how you have 4 albums, and only yesterday, I think you had Camino come out. And
Yes.
can you tell us a little bit more about where the name comes from? It makes me think of, like pilgrimages and things like that.
Sure. So, I mean, it's my first recording with this label, Pentatone, who are a sort of European label with some artists that I've long admired, and look, it took me 3 albums to find those guys, and I think it's also the first time I played Spanish music um, on record, and that's also been something that's taken a long time to come to, and I think we were going to originally record something more outrageous as a debut album, but because of COVID, it meant the forces that we required for that recording, we couldn't bring them together, and we were forced to rethink. And of course, at that point, it was the first lockdown, and things were much more difficult to plan. One was also forced into the realization that actually, I didn't want at that point recreationally to play things that were disturbing me because I just have a breakdown. And I instead was spending a lot more time with things that were from my childhood, and things that maybe also weren't from my childhood but brought back a sense of childlikeness in various forms. Satie's childlikeness, a sort of cynical, mesmeric alternative to uh, Mompo's idea of childlikeness as a sort of wonder is the genesis of all knowledge, kind of Arcadian, optimistic childlikeness, and so it has felt like a pilgrimage. I mean, it's easy to sound quite contrived and pretentious, but I I mean, I'm not interested in releasing albums that aren't slightly contrived and pretentious. So that's fine. I think like the centerpiece obviously is Mompo's Suite Compostelana, which sort of traces in more ways than one the pilgrimage of the Santiago de Compostela, and you have these references to these church bells and choral ideas and the rain and the bagpipes of Galicia and the town fiestas, um, references to his biographical form of the Canción y Danzas. And it's not, it's not the kinkiest music, but it's reflective and perfumed, and um, the source of much comfort over what was a very difficult year and a half so far. And I think Mompo's vision as well of spirituality is not something overtly ecclesiastical. It's something slightly more subdued, and it's fitting that it references, in whatever way it references the pilgrimage of the Santiago de Compostela, because that has become something less ecclesiastically inclined. Instead, it's become something sort of radically humanist. So it felt right.
Well, since the release, I managed to listen to it only once, all the way through, and I can say it's quite a beautiful experience. So for anyone who's wondering what to hear next, I believe it's available on Spotify, or even better, you can probably buy a physical CD.
If you buy it on Spotify, or if you get the digital album, I think you miss 3 tracks. So there are like some SATI tracks that are only available on Apple Music and on the physical CD. Just to clarify, just in case somebody is like, why is it only 43 minutes long?
Fantastic, highly recommendable, and I'm fascinated how things seem to be slightly backwards sometimes. Like it seems after doing, let's say, softLOUD, your second album, you felt safe enough to record Spanish music, like by your 4th album, whereas most people might feel that, you know, they better start off with the Spanish stuff, and once they feel safe with that, they'll go, you know, all crazy and pull out the disruptive repertoire. But it's
I think it depends on what you're scared of, right? I mean, in terms of like how I wanted to frame my career, like I was very worried that, you know, it's very easy to become stuck in the Spanish rut, right? And I think it's, you know, we've seen it, right, in this country and like in many countries, that the major labels will cart out a new guitarist. The guitarist will say, I'm breathing new life into this instrument and I'm doing something radically different. And then they release Spanish music and you're like, what the fuck? Like, what's this all about? And it's not radically different. It's just it's the same rep, right? It's the same 3 hours or so of rep. And I sort of felt like I knew when I was younger that it seemed like those young guitarists would release that music and become, you know, sort of pigeonholed into the same mold, because it's so established. It's so easy to fall into that same trench. And you've got to sort of plow your own furrow and do that. So I don't know. It was very much something I was trying to avoid, and I think people should think about.
Sorry, my microphone's off. Yes. There we go. Yeah. It's quite true.
Well, I mean, what do you think? Right, you've recorded CDs, and like, what have you recorded, and why did you record that? I'm curious.
Well, interestingly, I don't have a commercial album release. I've only recorded snippets and videos and things like that. And usually it's kind of quite ad hoc. Like, it's not really under any overarching idea, like this is my vision kind of thing. But yeah, usually it's just been things I can really relate to from a personal point of view, and I haven't had the opportunity to curate, you know, kind of a release as a whole. So it's very much a very live question for me right now. Like, what would constitute something worthy to put out there as, you know, one kind of product that makes sense as a whole. So yeah.
Look, I mean, the only thing I'd say practically that I've come across a lot recently is that a lot of people are waiting to find something perfect, and I just don't think it exists. You're trying to perfect a way of approaching programs rather than perfect any one program.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think perfectionism is kind of it's almost a character flaw. Like, what's excellence is rather a better one, a better virtue to have, perhaps, where you just, you know, have good work ethic, try to do your best, but are not limited by the daunting idea of something having to be absolutely perfect. I'll think about that when I go to bed tonight. Thank you. I was wondering, we've talked a lot about programming and, you know, how you might follow different ideas at different points for different projects, and it seems it's very much a kind of fluid thing for you, and it's been lovely to hear about that. Is there like anything else, any other thoughts like about music making that's been maybe keeping you busy or kind of making you reflect recently? Anything that you'd care to share, like anything you've learned perhaps recently? It's a very vague question, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I was just thinking, like, it's a question that's come up. about like what's one lesson that you have, and it's
Yeah, that's the one.
it's tricky, because especially over the last like year and a half, like there are no lessons. Life is chaos. It's all meaningless. Like it's very hard to come up with anything optimistic. I think that the ways that we tend to think about career, etc., are often in quite ordered, target-driven ways. We have quite well-defined ideas of when we think we will regard ourselves as being, at the next level or having made it. But it's just as false as any biography or idea of your story thus far is, right? It's just it's made up, and I think I've sort of just been embracing that like I can. It's sort of freeing to forego the idea that you have any degree of control over what's going on. Right?
So this is perhaps more of a personal question, so feel free to elude it entirely. But the way you're talking, like I have a suspicion of what you might answer, but I'd rather you kind of say, like, do you feel you've arrived somewhere right now, or is it a similar feeling to perhaps a few years ago, where you kind of said, well, I'd like to go further, and now this is kind of your new normal, where you are in your career, in your life, and now you still want to go further? Like, is there the same degree of novelty? Is it perhaps a little more settled? How would you say your life feels now compared to 3 or 4 years ago, in those terms?
It feels just as fragile as it did. I definitely feel like I have some nicer concerts that I didn't have before. But I think I'm also more aware of other people around me who've been quite successful and have lost it all, and that any one person can lose a lot at the drop of a hat. And yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm particularly successful, but I'm definitely grateful for the things that I've had. Yeah, I mean, if my hands broke tomorrow, I'd definitely be like, well, I had a good run, and that was a good time. And I'm happy with some of the recordings that I made and some of the concerts that I gave, and that's okay, there are like very specific tasks that I want to kind of complete and see through to their end that will take 7 or 8 years to complete, and I'm excited to see how that will go. I don't know. It's hard not to be a little depressed by the whole state of affairs, and like I do really feel like we're in the end days. I mean, every generation has believed that it's the last generation, right? In the 60s, I guess that seemed particularly bad with the sort of constant existential A-bomb threat. But like now we have the A-bomb threat, and we have like the very real, inexorable likelihood of total ecological collapse. And it's it's hard to think about career goals in the context of like complete societal breakdown. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, and I think the more I talk to my friends about it, the more I'm like, I realize like so many of my friends, they don't have savings. They have no intention of saving. Their retirement plan is the revolution. You know what I mean? It's just like nobody like, it's just, and I think that sense of ennui, like, I'm not saying this to evade the question. I think it really is like, it's really real. Like it's really like I was played this little like mind game the other day with a friend, and we were trying to imagine like how would I feel if like the climate crisis was all of a sudden not a thing. And I would feel so relaxed. I would feel so content and okay. And it's just this kind of pain and terror that you bring with yourself around all the time. Um, and I do believe it informs everybody's artistry.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. I have to say, first of all, you seem to hang out with a very cheerful group of friends. Uh, that,
Yeah, my friends are the cheeriest.
but that's fantastic. What's your retirement plan? Revolution. That's brilliant. Um, I don't know why I bother saving. It's like, yeah. I also have to say,
You're gonna fight the good fight.
yeah, exactly. It's like I would probably be the first to go. Uh, but yeah, I have to say, you mentioned something in the middle, like very much for the sake of all of us. I hope that your hands don't break at any point soon. It's quite a few of us, I think, that enjoy your music making. I can speak not only as an audience member, but if I dare say, a colleague being guitarist. You know, it's very much a source of inspiration and courage, I think, to follow whatever you want to, whatever you feel has value. And when I see your music making or your projects, your albums, I feel there's no fear there, and that's something refreshing and inspiring, I think, in a world where, as I mentioned earlier, like it's easy to have these preconceptions that you're supposed to do certain things. So that's really wonderful. But yeah, going back to the other topic you mentioned, like the state of the world today and how things might change. You mentioned like the ecological aspect. I'm also quite curious to see how developments like, I don't know, artificial intelligence and things like that might change the landscape, because it's something which is disrupting so many different industries. I read a book maybe a year ago called "The Future is Faster Than You Think." I think it's Peter Diamandis and some other guy, Kotler, and they talk about how so much relies, kind of piggybacks on computing power, which is increasing, kind of doubling every 2 years, or at least it was like for a large amount of time, and how that affects everything. Like now you have AI legal robots. Like you could actually find some pretty good legal advice online without having to pay anyone. So that's like very disruptive in one sense. You'll have cars which will drive themselves. If you have cars that drive themselves, suddenly why not live, an hour or 2 hours outside of London in a suburban area and just get your Tesla to get you to work and back and sleep on the way, which will affect like the urban landscape. So there's so much potential for the world to be a very, very different place than it is now in just a couple of decades. And it's like, how can one think that is not going to affect music or arts in general somehow? But how exactly is it going to affect it? I have absolutely no clue. Like, I wondered if that's something you've ever wondered about and something you've thought about. What will the music of the future be like? What do you expect composers to do? Will it be only composers, or somehow computers part of this process? Sorry, there was a lot of weird stuff in that statement slash question.
No, it's fine, and I appreciate the all black uniform as well. It's reminiscent of certain Silicon Valley leaders. But I
You can't see my jeans, but I'm basically like with the Steve Jobs.
Well, at least you're wearing jeans. I'm not wearing any under. So I think that
Careful there.
the reason I go to concerts is because I like to be. There's an element of risk involved, like it's interesting because you're watching somebody do something that is so difficult that they trained for such a long time to do. Um, and there's the very real possibility that they're just going to fail and not do it. And you're sort of hoping with them and and sometimes, like, well, you're playing and you know that you have some colleagues in the audience that maybe are hoping against you as well, but that's okay. But I think there's this element of, like, it's a combination of vulnerability and ideally the result that you'll see somebody overcome that vulnerability and achieve, despite all the humanity that they have, um, and that is the way they become superhuman. And so, you know, like, with direct reference to us, I'm not really interested in seeing robots performed, because you know that they're going to do it, like, perfectly in one way or another, and there's none of that vulnerability there. Um, so, I'm not really in fear of what we want to see humans do it because we see somebody who is like us, um, and maybe we see somebody do something that is so alien to the specialism that we're trained in, and we don't understand it, and yet they succeed, and that's why it's special. Um, it's the plausibility of the idea that if we spent that time, we could become that too, or maybe we couldn't, and that second idea is maybe more seductive because it's all the more special. Um, yeah, that's probably what I think. I mean, have you heard much successful AI music? Um, I've heard some pretty successful stuff. AI music writes cinema scores better than Hans Zimmer, but, like, it's Hans Zimmer, for God's sake, you know. So, like, I don't know. I don't know. I I don't worry about it conceptually anyway. Um, I'm sure there'll be an audience there to see the latest Tesla humanoids play um, Paganini caprices. But I think once the Tesla humanoids start doing all sorts of other things that put humans out of work, the audience will sort of train away. I think,
So
yeah.
I guess this is a really, really bad moment to admit that I actually like Hans Zimmer and
Yeah.
but yeah.
That's okay. And look, I didn't say I didn't like Hans Zimmer. It's just, like, it's Hans Zimmer,
But for example, I'm thinking you mentioned AI composing music. So maybe not performing. I could see how that might not catch on particularly well. There's something about, yeah, seeing like a fellow human being, on stage, kind of going through the same things you might be going, and empathizing with that in a way which makes it a unique experience that wouldn't be replicated when you don't see someone like yourself. But for example, AI composing music, like I have this imagination that you could conceptualize a Spotify where the music is not actually pre-recorded, but it's just made on the spot by an AI out of a combination of your preferences and your mood, let's say, and just give you the perfect combination of what would make you feel the best, like give you that musical candy, so to speak, like what would uplift you when you're down, or kind of that kind of thing. How disruptive would you imagine AI might be in the creative process, or maybe composers slightly relying on AI, as you mentioned, like maybe movie scores, or I think I saw Hilary Hand do some kind of project which involved AI composing, like a human kind
there's
of
a lot of it, yeah.
how do you say, orchestrating it, like managing it, but then kind of letting the AI run with it.
Like, do I think it's interesting as a concept? Maybe. Do I think it's, like, am I a contemporary Luddite? Yes. I'm not interested in things that create pleasing experiences for people for their, like, I mean, Spotify Taylor play. I don't know. Like, I don't find that artistically interesting. And I sort of also don't care if the market rewards it, because I don't think the market. I don't believe in the market. So I'm probably the wrong person to ask for, like, a straightforward answer. But I just I find composers interesting because they go through the same traumas that we do when we play a piece of music. Um, it's the same pain, the same degree of vulnerability, the same idea that they might have failed, but yet, you hope against the idea that they might fail, and it's that relationship to humanity, and the existential joy of maybe having thought it was failed, and to realize it hasn't. It's exactly the same thing. I don't know, man. I'd really like to see Bezos's penis ship play Paganini's Caprices. That's the way I feel.
Got it. Okay, enough of the robot questions.
I don't know. I think it depresses me because, like, all this money that gets poured into robots, and like, not even like, okay, sometimes I'm like, it's all part of the same machine and the same, like, the idea of progress, and like things that might seem silly superficially are actually like part of a deep drive towards the furtherment of human, understanding of machine processes and stuff, and it could lead to something. But also, I'm just like, these billionaires, man, just like, they're not, the way you get to be that rich is by exploiting people. And I can't help but see that in all the extravagance that I see in the production of these robots. um I just look, maybe it's just lockdown, but I've spent a lot of time on the Instagram page Marxist Leninist Meme Party.
That's the source of true knowledge. I think that's a pretty good one to memes cannot be underestimated or overestimated. Yeah, that's the way to put it. There you go. Okay, nice plug. I like it. But I think something a little closer to home. I remember, was it Yanis Varoufakis? I think he mentioned like how this technological revolution might at some point reach a point where you don't actually need so many people spending their time producing, and there's a lot more leisure time, which in his opinion I think would lead to it being very likely that you'd have a universal basic income, because if you don't have people needing to work but you still need people to consume, you basically need to give them money so they can keep the system going. But anyways, like that's
yeah, but dude, I mean, they said that about, like, that's what Marx's whole idea was, and it didn't happen then, did it? Like, I mean, what happened was people got machines to do it, they started paying people less to operate them, and they took all of the profit themselves. I mean, it's like, that's the last 100 years in action. I mean, like, I just don't believe that these billionaires aren't just going to become incredibly richer. And now it depends on what kind of UBI you're talking about as well. I mean, like, the Zuckerberg Bezos UBI is the idea that you just dissolve all benefit systems and social welfare things, and you just give them, the bare minimum that they need to survive, and ideally some sort of like food substance. I mean, it seems completely in keeping with the whole Silicon Valley mindset that they're developing, like, the Huel mentality that, like, it's, oh, you can forget about flavor, guys, you just need your nutrients and your calories. It's just like so dystopian,
I take it you're not a Huel guy either then.
I've actually never tried the stuff, and I have loads of friends who actually really don't mind it as well. I think, like, I'm already like an unwilling slave to the mentality of the market, even if consciously I'm like, I reject this. Um, so I think Huel would feel like just that step too far. I don't know. Have you tried Huel? What's your opinion on
I
Huel?
have. I do on occasion consume it, but I feel the need to drive this conversation back to some kind of musical ground. So I was going to propose, because we have a few questions coming in, and how do you feel about addressing some of those?
Look, I will address them, but can I please go to the toilet?
Yes, absolutely. You're
Okay.
excused.
I'll be like 1 second.
Please. All right. So everybody, hi there. While Sean goes off for a minute, I'll just have a look at questions. If anyone has any questions, any dire questions that they need replied by Sean, please make sure to make them now, and we'll try our best to get through to them. I can only see 3 questions on Tonebase platform, but I do see a few on YouTube and Facebook. So I'll try my best, actually on YouTube, I'll try my best to get through them. And yeah, let's see. I can see that, yeah, there are quite a few of you asking some things. Well, what can I say? I can give you a small tour again. Remember, if you're just tuning in, if you're not familiar with Tonebase, we do have regular live streams. Every single week we have events going on, and you will find that if you access our forum, I'll put a link here on the page. Let's see. That's our website for the Tonebase forum, and you go to home, actually the landing page. If you go down to live calendar, you'll be able to see the events that are happening, that are coming up. And yeah, you can make sure to ask your questions there beforehand. Check out what the event is about. You'll find links to go to the event, so on. So anyways, I think Sean is back, so I won't bore you anymore with this. And I'll go back to our view here. All right.
I guess the secret's out, and you all know I am wearing trousers after all.
Darn, we are severely disappointed. What can I say? But let's go with questions. So I have, let's see, a question from Palmer here on Tonebase. He asked, what is the lute-like instrument on your softLOUD album cover?
I don't know. It was a prop. It's not really a lute. I think it seems more like some kind of steel-strung bandora, but I didn't play it, and I'm not going to play it.
There we go. Okay. Next question, Paul Kennedy. He says, I found that I tolerate or enjoy many contemporary pieces if I play them. Do you find that to be true? I guess his question is pointing towards like he enjoys them more playing them rather than hearing them.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of that is about understanding, and that when you play things, you understand them deeply, and often contemporary music can be abstruse and astringent, and that's something that you don't necessarily process on a first listen. I love the William Faulkner story of him getting asked by this interview in the Paris Review, a lot of your readers have found your works difficult to understand, even after a second or a third reading. What new approach might you recommend to them? And he was like, read it 4 times. And I think, it's not necessarily, I think, why is it that we find it more pleasurable to play than to necessarily listen? It's because the amount of energy and understanding that goes into being able to play it for the first time from beginning to end is much more, it's much deeper than the amount of understanding that goes into listening to or just hearing something for the first time.
So my short follow-up question to that is like, how much do you expect music should be understood as opposed to, as cheesy as it may sound, felt or just kind of intuitively grasped?
It's all getting a bit deep here. I don't know. I mean, look, if you want to be, I think you have to decide that, and then on the basis of that, pick which concerts you go to. or pick how much research you're going to do before you go to a concert.
Fair enough. Okay, another question. Let's see. Kevin asks, Sean, did you do your own transcriptions on Camino and other albums? He asks.
So, I mean, yes and no. I mean, it's just that classic thing of like sort of using composite of various arrangements as a basis, and then making your own alterations to those arrangements on the basis of the original score. There are definitely arrangements that I'm closer to in certain discs than others. In Camino, I think I'm pretty close to Reichenbach in quite a few arrangements, pretty close to Hauptstock in others, but ultimately with enough deviation that I don't think I could. That I think if I said this is Hauptstock's arrangement, it would ultimately be misleading to people that might go in search of that arrangement. You know what I mean? I mean, in some ways it's closer to Bagger but like, you do have to make it like when you're looking at a CD and you're like, well, I could be really detailed about it, but it would just look so neurotic on a back cover. It's tricky, So that's where I'm at. I think the metadata on Apple Music says it's Hauptstock's arrangement, though.
Got it. Short question. This is out of personal curiosity, but on your Bach album, I remember hearing a few Ds transposed with the capo, whatever they are. Do you use detuning for like the A minor fugue 997, or do you play around with editing for that one?
A lot of playing around with editing.
I love that because it's I don't know. I feel that this notion that you should an album should only do what you're able, or should only portray what you're able to do on a stage is a bit outdated. It's like saying a movie should only have what an actor is able to do in a theater. It's like, it's nonsense, right? Like you don't expect Meryl Streep not to take the opportunity to like do her scene 20 times until it's perfect and then edit that together with whatever. Like that's just part of this new phenomenon we have called recording. New, it's like it's been around for a couple of decades. But yeah, fantastic. Okay, that was just a personal kind of itch. I wanted to ask you that.
Look, I mean, I do think albums can be whatever you want them to be, and sometimes they are just snapshots of like a moment, and sometimes they, it's okay to think of them as a sort of like perfect refined object of the sum of all the work you've done on interpretation so far as well. But I don't know. It seemed right for the way I wanted to approach it at the time, and there are definitely loads and loads of things I do differently in the event that I was going to re-record Bach.
By the way, another fantastic album. If you're ever looking for some fresh Bach, you'll find some played by Sean on any streaming platform, or even better if you buy the physical album. But let's go through another few questions and we'll see if we can bring it home. So Kevin Lowe, you might recognize the name, a friend. He says, do you foresee guitarists having to learn classical guitar, electric guitar, lute, and other potential plucked instruments for contemporary practice as a norm in the future?
I mean, basically, no. I think, look, the way I approach it is probably that the electric guitar is largely a solution to programmatic issues than something I feel that I'm able to use to explore musical devices as deeply as I want to at the moment. And I think it's something that I'm developing, but I do feel like having electric guitarists who specialize in contemporary music is pretty unusual. I mean, I can think of like 5 or 6 who are really good at it. That's a lie. I can think of 2 who are really good at it. And they spend an awful lot of time doing that. And I believe that I can be very good at it in the future. And it's taking a lot of energy. I just don't see that energetic output becoming the norm. I do see a lot of people on Instagram saying they're a classical and electric guitarist.
Okay, so that's Kevin Lowe's question.
Nice question, Kevin.
Hey Kevin,
hope you're
wherever
well.
you are. Gilbert Walker says, what's Sean's views on Brouwer as repertoire?
Some of it's good. I think that's what I think. Some of it's good.
Okay.
I think the 1990 sonata was good.
Have you ever played his first sonata?
Yeah, I played it to him actually. You know, I mean, look, Leo's very chilled out, and Leo's pretty old. I mean, like, I don't know, man. I mean, I don't know. Like, there's really not much to say, and I think that says something.
Okay. Were Sean's Monpu arrangements his own on Camino? I suspect those aren't arrangements, are they? Or did you change them much from the score?
So I used the Gilardino manuscript with lots of alteration and quite a few reversions to like Segovia's ideas. And I think there was a composite of Paolo Pegorara's arrangement of the Cantheon number 6 and the dancer arrangement of Reichenbach's, with again a significant amount of like alteration and deletion in certain lines.
Got it. Okay, I think there's an interesting comment. I think it was when we were talking about environmental issues. Someone says, yeah, but Tárrega still composed and played while his country experienced a civil war and a cholera epidemic. You will be okay. I don't know if that's reassuring or not, but
but not a total ecological collapse. It's just nothing. We've never experienced a total ecological collapse. It's just a different level. Sorry.
That's true. Yeah. Okay, and I think that's probably all the questions I can think of that. Let's see. Yeah, that one.
I feel like it looks like you're looking at questions that are too rude to ask, but maybe that's just my mind in the gutter.
There's maybe one or two I'll skip for now, but
really, oh my God, I can't wait to look back on them.
Not as much rude as potentially polemic. So, but anyways, I think we can do polemic without any help. But yeah, so I think that's basically all I think we can expect for today. You've been incredibly busy, and you've really been super generous in sharing your time with us after, as I said earlier, like 6 hours of rehearsal, 4 hours traveling, getting up at 5:45. And maybe I'd like to finish up by asking you, what were you rehearsing today?
So on Monday there are 2 performances at the BBC Proms in London. They are a 1 p.m. and a 6 p.m. performance at Cadogan Hall. New arrangements of Ariel Ramirez's songs for flute, percussion, mezzo, and guitar, and some electric guitar as well, and Piazzolla's L'Histoire de Tango, as well as Clarice Assad's arrangement of Yo Soy Maria from Maria de Buenos Aires. So it's going to be quite an eclectic program within the Argentinian 20th century. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be a bit of a crowd pleaser, quite a celebratory proms-friendly thing. Yeah, come along if you can.
Amazing. Sounds like a wonderful event. Can I ask, will you play Piazzolla in full, 4 movements, or are you playing a selection?
Full, yeah.
And is that just with flute, or are you adding anything to that?
Just flute. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, it sounds like you have enough variety to, keep things interesting in the program as a whole. I'll definitely be keeping an ear out for that one. I encourage anyone who's able to listen to it. I think usually you can only get those BBC shows if you're in the UK or using VPN or something like that. So do check it out, or so if you're able to go to the prom, even better if you're in London. And I just want to again, mention that Sean's album Camino was released yesterday. It's already receiving rave reviews. I saw one in The Guardian, which was pretty good. So if you're looking for something to listen to, tomorrow, Sunday, I do recommend it fully. I just had a listen earlier today. It's really wonderful. And yeah, thank you again, Sean, for being on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you about not only programming, but who you are, what you do, what makes you tick, and what's coming. So we hope that we'll get to hear a lot more from you. And I personally look forward to seeing what your upcoming projects are.
Thanks, Manny. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, really.
All right, so with that, I will say goodbye to our viewers. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you so much for sticking around, for sending your questions. I do remind you that, oops, have something on the screen that shouldn't be there. I do remind you that you can always send us emails with feedback, what you thought of our live streams, what you might expect to see in the future. And yeah, generally we're just really happy to hear from you. So you'll see on the screen my email address. Feel free to pop an email through. And otherwise, I'll look forward to seeing you in the next event. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a lovely rest of